Hello and welcome to Healing Trauma Mamas. I'm your host, Madon Wingo. Thank you for joining us as we share in our stories and experiences of healing from childhood traumas and birth traumas. Listen as we discuss our struggles, our failures, our strengths and our victories, and all those lessons we've learned along the way. Why, hello everyone today. Welcome to the Healing Trauma Mamas podcast. I'm so excited today because I get to have a good dear friend of mine on the podcast, Miss Aly Wyatt. She's with us. Many of you have probably listened to me on the Happy Home Birth podcast. That's where I shared my story. And that's really how the whole Healing Trauma Mamas Facebook group began. And then the whole idea to even start the podcast began. And so on that podcast that I was on with Caitlin Fusco, I mentioned two births that were very meaningful for me and really taught me a lot as a student midwife. And one of those births, if you'll recall, is the one where I talked about a mom who had to surrender and just give it all over to Jesus. And then she finally got her baby. Well, that wonderful mom is Aly. And she gets to join us today, Aly. So do you mind introducing yourself to the listeners?
Of course. Hi, thanks, Madon. I'm excited to be on here today. I appreciate you thinking of me. My name is Aly Wyatt, like Madon said, and I have a wonderful husband. I've been married for 12 years. Next week, I think, maybe it's a few more weeks. That's okay. But I have 6 children, 5 biological. One of them is adopted. But I have had all sorts of births. They have I have done the gamut of things. And
you got a lot of experiences to pull from, Aly.
There you go. Yes, I have a lot of different experiences, and it's been an interesting journey. But yeah, I've kind of it's been a really something that I have learned to look at as a blessing. It's been really cool. So yeah, that's a little about me.
Yeah, well, I most of the listeners don't know much about you. Obviously, I know a lot more. I'm thankful that we've able to become friends after I was able to help with your care as a student midwife, and then kind of this journey going forward when I was able to be on the Happy Home Birth podcast that kind of caused you and me and the other member that you guys have heard talk about of the Healing Trauma Mamas group, Alyssa, that I kind of talked to each of you before I joined and talked about you on the podcast. So it's real interesting because that just kind of got snowball of things going. And then we decided to do the Facebook group, and then we got to talk a lot more and really just get more involved with each other's lives and in birth work, which hopefully you'll get to share with us later how that's changed for you. But one of the neatest things about Aly's family, you all may not know, is she actually had her baby in an RV.
I did.
Yeah. And do you want to tell like how many children? Like, it's so neat because my family and I looked at having an RV once and traveling, and we have 6 kids, and we always thought, how would we do that with 6 kids? And I got to see how with Aly.
Yeah. So that's kind of a funny thing about us. So we, my husband's in the oil field industry, and so we did some traveling for some years. When we started in our camper, we had 4 children, and we ended up living in it for 4 years. And over those 4 years, God gave us 2 more blessings. So yeah, it was kind of a crazy deal. We started out in Oklahoma. We ended up in New Mexico, Texas-New Mexico border area. Yeah, we kind of made do. There were a couple sets of bunk beds, and we added a toddler bed, and a lot of purging, not make sure we didn't have a lot of stuff.
A lot of minimalism going along. Huh?
There you go. Yeah, we got rid of a lot of things, and it was just a great time. We learned a lot about just having less and having more experiences and time together. So yeah, it was really cool.
Oh, something kind of neat for me. I got to help with a couple different births in RVs, but there was one couple. It was their first baby, and they had a very large, beautiful RV, right? But we still didn't have much space. for having the birth tub in there and everything. And I loved how you guys worked everything out and you planned ahead. And we had so much space, for all the kids to be in there and the midwife and me and and everything. And it was so nice and cozy and beautiful. And we weren't just like crammed in. It was nice. Yeah, I really enjoyed it.
I'm so glad. Yeah, we did a lot of making sure our furniture was collapsible and made sure that that we could get rid of things and move things around so that was possible. Is really important to me. So it worked out.
Well, and I got a little familiar with the RV, so I spent a fair amount of time there. So we can talk about that here in just a little bit about how that went. Do you want to share any of your history prior to children, or you want to tell us a little bit about some of your births that you experienced?
Sure, I will, if that's okay. I'll just jump right into
go for it.
To my kiddos. So my husband and I got married. I was, oh goodness, like 20. And we had a plan, let's wait a couple of years and we'll probably have 2 or 3 kids. And instead we got pregnant when we've been married for 6 months with Betty, my oldest. And so I was 21 when she was born, and I just kind of had the traditional medicated birth. We had a doctor that, we loved, and this little kind of designer hospital. And I went in whenever in early labor, like as soon as I realized I was in labor, I went in and they said, you have the right to not be in any kind of pain if you don't want. So you're only a 4, but we'll give you an epidural. And I said, okay. And so I know. And so they gave me an epidural, and I went to sleep for 12 hours and I woke up and the doctor was like, okay, are you ready to have a baby? And I was like, sure. So it was it was a fine birth. Nothing was just dreadful. But it was definitely just kind of your typical run of the mill. I didn't know anything about birth. I come from a large family, but my mom didn't really talk about it too much. And so, I just did the thing. And, she was born, and at the time, I was like, oh, like everything was just perfect. And so that was my first birth, pretty uneventful. And but then my second birth, and I should say this, with her, I had prodromal labor where, you have real contractions. It's not just like my cervix didn't do anything. So for like 4 weeks, it was a long time. It probably had to do with, I didn't have a ton of hydration going on because I liked Dr. Pepper, and no one said anything to me like, hey, young girl, you should probably be hydrated. So that was cool.
It's interesting how much doctors don't talk about nutrition.
I know. I had no idea. Yeah. And I remember like them saying, walk around, whenever, before I was admitted. And I was like drinking Dr. Pepper in the hospital, walking laps. It was awful. Don't do that, folks. But that's fine. Anyways, then I actually got pregnant again, like 3 months postpartum. So because we just didn't, I don't know. I just didn't think about, anyways, it doesn't matter. I stopped nursing and I got pregnant. And so, but we were excited and it was good. And my son, Stan, and I actually had a different doctor with him. That doctor moved. Actually, you'll know this. I have had different providers with every single one of my births. Or no, just because that's happened. I haven't technically fired anyone or anything. It just happened that way. So with Stan,
and you guys have moved around a lot, right? So
you're right. We have, when you do that. With him, it was the same deal, pretty straightforward. I just planned on doing it the same way. And I had prodromal labor again for like 6 weeks. And at 39 weeks, my doctor told me, he said, you're having, because I was still having the contractions. And he just said, if you come in, like we could just break your water and you'll have a baby. Like your body is contracting. And he goes, but I can't do that till like 39 weeks. And I was just like, yes, I'm so ready to meet my baby. So, not ever really thinking about that my body, like my baby's not coming out because my baby's not ready and things like that. So it was
Yeah.
fine. I went in, and I get all checked in one morning. I'm like, okay, we're going to get induced, or not technically, he was just going to break my water. And he did. And as soon as he broke my water, he goes, oh no, that's not his head.
Oh,
Um,
goodness.
yes. So my son was upside down. He was breech, complete breech, I think it is, right? Where they're
Mm-hmm.
booty down.
Mm-hmm.
And so they said, you got to roll over on your side. And in an hour, you're having a C-section. Because at this hospital, like
Because
no
please don't
one was
push him out.
trained.
Don't.
I know,
Right.
exactly. No one was trained in how to
Oh,
do breech delivery. And he was just like, huh. I like to think though that, no one checked his position. And I like to think that that doctor will always check position from now on,
right.
because I just remember the look on his face. Like he was so mortified, like that happened.
And
But
he probably wasn't
um,
trained in breech at all,
oh,
because
exactly.
it's an it's an old skill that most don't get trained in anymore.
Exactly. He doesn't know how to do it.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I remember, and I was hysterical, upset and crying, and was on my side. And then all of a sudden, I mean, it had been like 10 minutes, and I was like, John, go get a nurse. And but he was not crowning because it wasn't his head, but he was starting to come out. I was
Mm-hmm.
like, he needs to come out right now. And, and the nurse is like trying to check me, and I'm like, I can't move she's like needing me to put my legs down. And I'm like, ah. And
Oh,
really,
goodness.
like looking back, I'm like, he would have just flown out. Like I was
Mm-hmm.
having fetal ejection reflex, like he was going to come out. So they whisked me to the ER real quick. Luckily, they didn't knock me out. They just did a quick spinal, and I had a C-section. Was not at all what I had planned.
Mm-hmm.
And, recovery from that with a 1-year-old, just 12 months, was tricky, but it was okay. But that happened. And,
It's
we
such a shame that they
got
don't
through
get trained
that.
in that anymore. I
I
mean, it's
know.
just a rarity to find a doctor who's trained or knows how to deal with it in a safe manner, and instead go
Exactly.
to C-section. I mean, a major
Exactly.
surgery for you instead. So
Yes, exactly.
just
That was the thing about it, is that I just really would rather not have major surgery personally. I'm like, oh,
yeah,
and so then that's what happened. And I'm sure they had to push him back up. I mean, because he was
they had to
coming out.
have if he was,
Yeah.
yeah.
So it was like a whole thing. But yeah, so then after him, we actually had, uh, let me think. My next children are 2 years after him. And so I guess, just a little over, or yeah, about a year later, we got pregnant and had a really early miscarriage.
Mm-hmm.
Which, it was really sad. And it was one of those things where no one told me that it was. Like I looked it up and was like, oh my gosh, I just had a miscarriage, because I had a positive
Really
pregnancy
early,
test,
huh?
and then
Yeah.
yeah, it was early. But that happened, and I was just devastated, and I had no desire to get pregnant.
Mm-hmm.
And that actually started us on our fostering journey, which is a whole nother story. But when that happened, we started like, okay, like won't think about getting pregnant, and we'll just help some kids, not for the point of adoption, because that isn't wise, but because we wanted these kids to be able to go home to their families. But it was a good distraction for me, and we started doing that. And pretty much right as soon as we got certified, I got pregnant again, with Buck. And Buck, my doctor, so I went back to the guy that did my C-section, and just said, for the very beginning, and told him, like I really want to have a VBAC. And he said, I can't do that, but there's this midwife program at this hospital, and they will do it. So which was very kind of him. He was really empowering that way. He wasn't like, no, you need to stay here. He said,
Mm-hmm.
Go. And so I go to this midwife at this hospital, and we had, I had a couple kids, so I didn't have a whole lot of education from them or anything, but we did. It was a good experience. And I was 38 weeks pregnant. I'm just going to throw this in here. It's not really birth
Sure.
related, but When I was 38 weeks pregnant, we had a little girl go home, which was great. That's, they found like an aunt or something. She went to go stay with them. And so they asked us if we wanted to take a break from fostering. And we said, well, if we stop, we probably won't start again. So, but we'll only take a baby, which, if you know anything about fostering, there's sometimes people are like, oh, we just want babies, and no one ever it takes forever. So we're not expecting anything. And I'm 38 weeks pregnant, and they call me with a 4-day-old baby boy, my son, George. And
that was a little unexpected, huh?
A little unexpected. I was huge pregnant. And George had to go to the hospital. He had some seizures, and we took him to the hospital. And I just remember like walking through huge pregnant. 40 weeks pregnant. We're in the hospital with him, and people are like, labor and delivery's on the other floor.
Oh my.
I know. We're like, we know, we're not here for that. But anyway, so I'm there at the hospital. And I remember being like, I think I'm in early labor the day that George got checked out. So we put him in the car with my sister and her husband, and we go up, and the midwife, there was a midwife on call, and she checked me, and, I was in labor, but she said I was in early labor. And for some reason, it did not click in my brain that she was telling me, yes, you're in labor. Like, it just didn't hit me. I remember her saying, well, this is early labor. How about I give you something to help you rest, and you go home, and then we'll see you probably tomorrow to have a baby. But she was very kind. She didn't want me to just like go on the clock, because it was early. And I said, okay. And it just did not register to me that I was in labor. She said I was, and I just didn't. And so what ended up happening is we went to my parents' house and slept on the couch, and I slept through labor.
Wow.
Like the whole thing. Yeah. I know. I remember waking my husband up, and I was like, and my plan with him was to, because with Stan, he had come so quickly. And like, I didn't, it was just my water broke, and then like he was ready to come. It wasn't a scary or painful experience until the very end, whenever he was, and I was trying to keep him from coming out. So I just was like, well, if it's like that, I'll just do it naturally. I hadn't prepared for this. I had no, I was just like, well, it was easy. Like, I could have, if he would have been head down, I could have pushed him out, no problem.
Well, so, you did. Yeah.
And so I was like, well, we'll just see. And so I get to the hospital with Buck. My husband made a very long drive really fast. It was not good. We get there, and they checked me. I was a 10. So there was no epidural. There's no, nothing. And so I'm laying there and I'm having a lot of back labor. He was not. This one is probably my most traumatic birth. And so I'll spend a little extra on it, but
sure.
I had a lot of back labor. I didn't really know what was going on because, I feel like the beginning part of labor is there for a reason. It's there for us to get our brains ready for, we're going to push baby out. So whenever you skip all that and you just wake up.
Oh yeah. That's gotta be like shock factor.
It was awful. Cause I was just panicking. And I was not, it's like waking up in transition, your brain is doing what it needs to do. So
yeah, because you get to, it's early labor, and then leading up to transition is all, building. It starts out maybe slow and a little easier, and then it builds and it builds and it builds and it builds, and you get used to it as it builds.
Exactly. And you're able to process what's happening.
Yes. But waking up in transition, waking up like that. Wow. Yeah.
It was nuts. And so we were at the hospital, and my midwife was not there. It was this lady I didn't know. And I'm sure they all just thought I was crazy because I was panicking. And really, I just needed somebody to let me panic and then come back in. But I couldn't advocate for that. I was in crazy town. So
of course.
She basically what happened, I was there 30 minutes before he was born. But in that 30 minutes, she was like, oh, you're having back labor, get on all fours. She didn't talk to me really. She walked out of the room. She came back. And I guess I had a cervical lip. where part of the cervix is not, just for anyone out there who doesn't know what that is. Part of my cervix, just a little piece of it still needed to go over his head. And instead of talking to me about that or anything, she just pulled the lip right over his head. And it was very painful. And I mean, that is probably my biggest point of trauma in all of this. And then my midwife got there a few minutes after that, and I pushed him out, and it was fine. I mean,
I think we talked about that you had a cervical injury.
Yes, that's what it was. I had this. She hurt me. It was my on my cervix, because she didn't. And well, and that'll get this story, but it'll get interesting when I talk about Elsie, my last one. I had a similar situation, but the way it was handled changed everything about it. So that was Buck. And then we waited 5 more years to have another kid. And part of that was we were fostering. And part of that was we had twins, essentially. They were the same age. But then another part of that was that, I mean, I was scared.
Oh, I'm sure. That was very traumatic.
It was dreadful. It was really, really scary. And I don't know that I really thought about it a lot to like name it as trauma until a lot later. But then whenever they were 5, I got pregnant with Elsie, or nope, Gladys. Sorry. Gladys.
We can't skip Gladys.
I can't skip Gladys. Gladys is 3 now. Was not nuts.
Oh, goodness.
I know. And she, we were there. The midwife program had been dissolved at that hospital. So I went with a doctor that a friend had used, and everything went fine, but I was nervous. I had a lot of white coat syndrome through the whole thing. I was just terrified. And I remember telling my husband, I was like, and I had not even ventured into home birth yet. And I remember telling him, like, I would rather just have this baby by myself with nobody there than go to a hospital. I was just terrified. But we went to this doctor, and she was kind, and she loved Jesus. And so we were like, okay, like this will be good. She was supportive. We talked about things. I hired a doula for this one. It was somebody I knew for a very long time.
Nice.
So it was a blessing. And, she helped us with like a birth plan. In my birth plan, it was very like, you will not touch me without asking. And I felt so dramatic because it sounded so intense in my head, but that's what I needed. I needed everyone in the room to understand, like, you are not going to touch me unless you ask me
absolutely
what I can do with.
Yeah.
And if I can't communicate, you may ask my husband, but you're not going to touch me without permission. And that's where I was at.
Which I know you didn't think about it too much then, but that is a very common trauma response from something like that.
Yes. Exactly. I mean, because that's what happened. Somebody touched me without permission, and it hurt me. And I was hurting after she pulled that cervical lip out, which would have gone away by itself. And there are other ways that we could hopefully, most likely, and we could have worked together as a team to help that go away. But because we didn't, I mean, it hurt for like 9 months, maybe even longer than that. And I didn't even tear. So that's the other thing. I've actually never torn at a birth, which is nuts. I don't understand how that's happened.
Did you bleed extra? Did they mention anything?
That birth, I don't know.
Okay, I was curious.
Yeah, I'm not sure. They didn't tell me. That's one interesting thing. Sometimes in the hospital, they don't tell you a whole lot.
Yeah.
But you say that, I'm kind of like, yeah, probably a little bit.
Yeah, I would expect that you did. I would expect you definitely had some trauma to that cervix for it hurting for 9 months afterwards.
9 months.
There had to have been some damage done there.
It was crazy.
Yeah. And I suspect that she actually ripped your cervix.
Yeah. Well, I didn't have any stitches.
But they couldn't stitch up. Yeah. Yeah.
But that's not a spot they could stitch up. So then maybe they tore my cervix.
Yeah. I would say that's very likely what happened for you to have damage and pain for that long afterwards.
That makes sense. That does make a lot of sense. I never thought about that before. Yeah. Cause I didn't have, I was there so quick. I didn't have an IV. I didn't have anything, which I mean, I was all about. But I do remember after she was born, they did give me an IV so they could give me some Pitocin for my, whatever uterus and all that. So that would make sense if I bled a little extra, that they would also be a little more
cautious.
intent on doing that. Yeah. So then with Gladys, and another thing I forgot about Buck, just to throw this in there, is that I also had the prodromal labor with him, but it was longer. It was like 8 weeks.
Yeah, us mamas that have multiple babies, for some reason, they just increase and increase and increase.
It's nuts. It's nuts.
And it is, because then you think like, I've had so many babies. Surely I know when I'm in labor and I know when like the real stuff is happening. So why am I dealing with this all the time?
I know.
Yeah.
Crazy. But we did that. And then he was also breech towards the end. And I did all the crunchy things. I mean, we went to the chiropractor and I did spinning babies and he flipped. So it was great. So that all worked out well. But then with Gladys, I was doing good. I had slightly elevated blood pressure when I went to the doctor because I was terrified.
Of course.
And
did your doctor seem to be like, did they seem to acknowledge that, or how did
she never said anything about it ever.
Okay.
Until I was isn't that, it's funny. Like I remember commenting, like the nurse doing it, and I'd be like, yeah, that's funny. Like, or maybe the nurse would say, oh, are you like, is everything okay? And also I'd like to say I had 5 young children with me at all of these appointments. So it's like this tiny hospital room and me and 5, essentially probably like 6 and younger, or 7 and younger, 3 years ago. Yep. 7 and younger. And I'm huge pregnant and I'm terrified. So yeah, there was a little bit going on, but the doctor never said anything about it. And never gave me any kind of education about gestational hypertension or preeclampsia or anything like that. So just throwing that out there.
Yeah.
And then Gladys was in a good position. Everything was good until like 34 weeks. She decided to flip and she was breech. So we did all the crunchy things. We did chiropractic and spinning babies and moxibustion and acupuncture. We did all the things. Yeah. She did not flip. And so the doctor offered this is interesting, an external version. And I was like, sure, but I didn't want an epidural. Because I wasn't planning to have one anyways. And so I go in and there are like 12 students. She's like, can all these people watch? They've never seen one of these done. And
oh, wow.
And without an epidural, most doctors where I was wouldn't do that. And so they all wanted to watch. And I was like, sure.
Most don't. It's pretty rare for somebody to have a version like that without an epidural.
It was really
or some type of medicine. I actually got the help go in the OR for them to do one in the OR, just in case was their thing, that if something, went south, then they would be able to handle it really well. And I had a mama that was the same as you, say, no, I don't want an epidural. I don't want any medication. I don't want anything. We're going to handle this. And I could see the doctor sweating and working so hard. And the mama was just breathing and holding it together. So I was like, yeah, that's very unusual for it. It's painful.
It's nuts. It hurts. Yeah. I mean, I made a lot of noise.
Yeah.
It was kind of okay, I got this. It's fine. I'm not hurting. I'm fine. Like that. And it was over. I mean, and she flipped easily. It was a blessing. The one thing I had to wait, they had a lot of emergency C-sections that day. So I was actually in a post-op room, like where they take you to recover from surgery. And I sat there all day, like waiting to get this done. So naturally with that, my blood pressure was also a little bit high, of course. And because I was sitting in this room and, people were in and out all day and I'm waiting and I'm nervous. And anyways, so she does the version. She leaves, she comes back and says, how do you feel about having a baby today? And I start to go, well, I mean, like, and she goes, oh, wait, it's not an option. Like you're having your baby. No, she goes, wow. You are showing all the signs of preeclampsia, which I was not. I would just like to point out real quick. Whatever the number is, it's like what, 140 over 90 or something like that.
Yeah. Anything above 140 over 90 is considered hypertension.
And I never even got that high. I got to like 137, 136.
Really?
But they were calling that.
Yeah, I was going to say, what other symptoms were you having? Anything?
That's a great question.
Yeah.
I think they just wanted to get me done,
Mhm.
especially since I just had a version. And I know a lot of doctors tend to induce right after a version anyways, but that wasn't what they were anyways.
Yeah.
I
That wasn't the
remember
reasoning
nurses,
she gave you.
exactly.
So,
And I
yeah.
remember nurses coming in periodically and like poking my feet, like to see if they were swollen, and they weren't. Like I could see the bones in my feet.
Wow.
But they were just
You
like
didn't have any
looking for
headaches or vision
nothing.
issues,
Absolutely
protein
not.
in your
Absolutely
urine?
nothing.
Wow.
Nothing. And so she decided that we were going to induce. And whenever you're in that situation, and I had my doula with me and everything, but the doctor was like, you are showing these signs. We have to do
Oh,
this. And we said,
wow.
okay, I know. So she induced me, and it went fine. I didn't have any pain meds, just all the Pitocin in the
Mhm.
world. And so I had her, and it went really well. I mean, really, the birth itself was beautiful and great. Obviously, there's a little weirdness and bullying and things that happened, but
Mhm.
the birth was good. So
Well, that's good.
yeah, so I mean, it was good.
I'm glad you
Gladys,
didn't have more trauma added on.
I know. I mean, that would have been dreadful.
Now, at this point in time, had you acknowledged the trauma from the previous birth and everything you'd went through with that? Had you
Not
talked
really.
about it?
I mean, I
Besides
had
with John,
told,
I'm sure you talked with John some about it, but
yeah, I mean, some. I mean, really, even with him, though, I tend to be the kind of person, I think a lot of us who deal with birth trauma or any trauma, I go
downplay
to
it.
yes, I'm overreacting,
Mm-hmm.
or childbirth hurts sometimes. Like, I don't know why I'm freaking out.
Yep.
But we had
That's pretty
acknowledged that I
typical.
had severe anxiety
Mm-hmm.
and depression. I mean, I was in between. Well, and I struggled after Buck. That whole
Mm-hmm.
5 years, I was in a really dark, scary place until, and really Gladys's birth in a lot of ways was very healing for me.
That's great.
Because even though things didn't go exactly as I had planned, I was able to kind of like, even silly, it's not silly, but little things like putting "you're not going to touch me" in my birth
Yeah,
plan.
feeling like you were in control somewhat this
Yes.
time. Yeah, I'm sure that
Yes.
helped
And
a lot.
yes. And like handing it to the nurse, and the nurse looking at it and saying, I remember she asked me about something in my birth plan about having Pitocin. I
Mm-hmm.
had said, and then I was being induced, and she came in and said, hey, so, you say that you're not really wanting Pitocin to help your uterus afterwards. I'm like, it's out the window at this point. Like, I'm pumped full of Pitocin. But even that, like, this lady, like, even though it was ridiculous, she still came and asked me about something on it. Like, she was actually
Oh,
reading
that
it.
was so nice.
So there were things that were so good and helpful about that birth. And
I am
I
so
felt
thankful
powerful.
for I'm so thankful for good labor and delivery nurses because they
I
are
know.
out there and they are a special breed and
They are.
it's wonderful
It
when you
really
get one. It's just the ones in
is.
between that we have to deal with sometimes that are very frustrating.
Oh yes, and I've had a few of those. I remember with Gladys, I had an IV back up into my arm, and
Hmm.
I tried to I so I pushed the button, and this nurse comes in, and like the most painful thing about Elsie's birth, and you know how people, I mean, I had a version, and people talk about you know Pitocin contractions being so
Yeah.
much more intense.
Mm-hmm.
The worst thing is she sent me 13 times trying to find a vein that
What?
night. Yeah,
13?
like 13 times. I was black and blue.
Oh my word.
And in the end, another lady came in and wiggled the original one and just taped it differently, and I was fine.
Oh
So that was cool.
goodness.
That was cool. So it's true. I
Oh.
mean, every now and then, I mean, she was sweet, but that
Yeah.
was awful. And so, and I already don't like needles and have the trauma, and so
Oh,
I was like, huh. But overall,
yeah.
that birth was very healing. And then I guess after Gladys,
Mm-hmm.
um, was Elsie when you came into my life,
Miss
Madonna.
Elsie.
So
Oh
Elsie, we
my.
traveled, and we were here in the middle of nowhere, Texas, New Mexico area. And um, Elsie, I was pregnant. I mean, I didn't know what to do. I had only heard I'd wanted to have a home birth.
Mm-hmm.
and really, this is so, it makes sense. I always worried about what other people thought about the way I was doing things. And I'd talked to John about wanting a home birth for a long time, but I was never brave enough just to be like, I don't care if my grandma thinks I'm weird, or I don't care if my friends think that it's not safe. Like, I don't care.
Mm-hmm.
I'm the mama, and I'm going to do what
There
I
you go.
think is best. There you go.
Mm-hmm.
And I hadn't done that. And I think moving into the middle of nowhere where I knew nobody, helped me with that,
Empowered
because
you a little bit, huh?
it did. I could make whatever choice I wanted, and no one was going to be around to tell me no. So, so we chose to do that, and you guys were so sweet. Um, and that I was so nervous. I remember asking you all, or I remember being like, okay, so here's a weird thing. We live in a camper. And you guys were like, yeah, it's fine. It's whatever.
Yeah.
And that was such a blessing. But
Yeah.
so
And then you almost
Elsie,
left us.
I
I
know, I
remember
know. We
that. And
almost
we were
moved
so
away, and then
sad.
came back. It was crazy. We thought John's job was just that we were going to go back to Oklahoma, and the Lord just brought us right back. So
Yes. I'm so thankful.
I am too. I really am. I really am. So with Elsie, we did things to help her not be breech. We started doing spinning babies, I think like 27 weeks. So that
Mm-hmm.
I felt very empowered about that. Um, and then really not an eventful pregnancy. I didn't struggle with my blood pressure. I don't think.
Mm-mm.
Did
I
I
don't think
struggle with
so
my blood
either.
pressure? I don't think
I
so.
don't remember thinking that. Mm-mm.
I don't either. So I didn't struggle with my blood pressure. I didn't struggle as much with anxiety and depression as I had like with Gladys. I really did well. We get to towards the end, and we actually pulled our camper closer to where you guys were,
Yes.
because there was a hospital nearby that I was comfortable about going to an emergency, because I
Yes, and
was
the
so,
midwife had a collaborating physician there
yeah,
that worked well with her. I don't work
yeah,
with that midwife anymore right now. I work with another midwife in my training, but
mm,
at the time over in that area, yeah, that was the best doctor in the hospital that she could transfer somebody to if needed, or talk with him
yeah,
about situations with clients. So that was really good. Yeah.
yeah.
So you guys moved the camper close to there, not necessarily closer to the
Oh,
midwife.
that's true.
Technically it
But of course,
was,
you
but
did
it
it
was in the
now.
town that was closest to the doctor, just in case, with you being a VBAC and
Yes,
everything. So
yes. I was still nervous about that a
yeah.
lot. I was nervous about, if there's an issue, what are we going to do? And
Mm-hmm.
so basically, looking back, I feel so bad. I realized I think I just always know pretty quickly when I'm in labor, and really I've always had pretty fastly. I mean, once my water breaks, like it's
We sure
done.
were expecting that.
I know, weren't we all? We were expecting me to
Uh,
go so fast. And
yes.
what happened was I called the midwife, or my husband called the midwife, and Madon, you were the midwife too, but I was just talking about, it doesn't
It's
matter
okay.
anyway. So
I had a lot further to travel than her because I was actually training with another midwife much
I know
further away at the time.
it was crazy. It was
Yes.
nuts. And so she got there, and they started like setting everything up. And I don't know, a long time into my labor in total, I'll just go ahead and say it, was 48 hours
Yep.
from the time I called you all. Probably more
Yeah.
like 24 hours of active labor, really.
Probably.
I don't know,
I don't know.
probably.
I don't know. I lose track on all
Or
that
maybe a little
stuff,
more
but
than that. But in the end, y'all were there for 48 hours.
yeah, we were there
And
a while. Yes.
it was
We
very
got to
long.
know that camper quite well.
It was great. Yeah, you did my dishes and things. I
Oh,
appreciate
well,
it.
you know.
It was nuts. But so I'm in labor. All my kids are there. You all are there. John's there. And it really wasn't, I mean, what, probably like, I don't know, and I don't even know if it'd be 24 hours of active labor, because I think it was more than that, because there was a point that evening. So probably 8, 9 hours later,
Mhm.
I was in the birth tub, and I was ready. I just started bearing down,
I
and we could all
know.
see her head.
It's craziness.
Elsie was crowning. I mean, she was right there. I was looking at her in a mirror, and all of a sudden she just sucked back up and turned around.
Never
And
seen anything like it,
that was nuts.
to be honest, which, at the time I was just a student I'm not even sure how far into my training at that point in time, but I had never heard of that happening before. And I was like, what? This is a little wild.
It was, well, and
because we were all gathered. We had the kids come in because we were like, okay, we're about to have the baby. And so everybody come on in, and all that.
And she just
not quite what happened.
Yep. And we were like, okay. I mean, we ordered pizza. Like,
yes,
I was like,
yes.
when this is done, I'm eating a pizza.
There you go. Yeah.
So that happened. And we ended up just trying to get some rest is what, I put what's that called? It's part of the, that circuit thing where you put the mile
circuit
down. Yes, it's part of that, where you put your chest down and your booty in the air.
Right.
We slept for a couple hours and then woke up.
Because she was fine and everything was fine and healthy. And yeah, you guys were doing well. It was just things were going a little differently than expected. So yeah.
So then we woke up and we just kind of got around and started all over again. And this time we got to a similar situation where she was right there and we could see her. And at this point I had a little bit of a cervical lift again, just like with Buck. I don't remember this.
Yeah. So we might want to interject here a moment that, I remember you and I talked some after I had been on the podcast and the Happy Home Birth, and you asked me, did I really say these things? And
yes.
Did this really happen? I'm like, yeah, I want to ask John too, because when we're in that moment and dealing with so many things, a lot of times we don't remember, exactly what it was that we said or that we did. And yeah, so you got to hear it from my perspective, a little bit of what was happening. And then, go ahead and you're welcome to tell, the rest of it, but I just remember how that kind of changed for you and hearing,
it's been crazy.
Yeah.
There were things, there were lots of things in this birth that towards the end there that I said and did that I didn't remember. And one of them was, my husband's, we had talked about, I was telling the midwife not to hurt me.
You were
a lot, like maybe yelling it.
You were.
And I didn't know. I mean, I have zero memory of this.
And on our side, at least I say our side, but I know because the midwife and I talked about that some, afterwards, but on our side, I mean, it was definitely trauma response. And it was definite, you could tell, like, it was almost like you were just back in that moment when your provider had to have ripped your cervix and hurt you so badly in the hospital. And it was like you were just transported back to that moment. And you didn't even recognize us as us. Like you weren't even seeing us. And we kept trying to reassure you and saying, we love you. We're not trying to hurt you. We're trying to help you have this baby, and you're tired. We understand. And you were just like blurry-eyed, not being able to like fully notice us and just talking about, no, stop, don't hurt me, stop, don't hurt me, and definitely trauma response for sure. That was like, whoa.
It was. And the thing that's crazy is I think that I wasn't concerned about it because like in my brain beforehand, because I'd had another baby in between these two births that were so similar and difficult. And I had a baby and everything she just blown out and I was fine. Like
that's the interesting thing about trauma is that we don't control when it comes up. So, or our triggers, as most people would talk to them, like sometimes, one thing might happen, but it was a little bit different situation. And so it didn't bother us at all. And then the same thing happens, but there's just a little bit of a difference and we react completely differently.
Exactly.
So, yeah, trauma is so funny like that.
It is. And the thing that, so what happened was, I remember our midwife, was like, she was talking me through. I remember her telling me like, okay, we're going to work together to try to get this lip to go back. And I remember being there and doing it. And besides, I mean, obviously I was telling her not to hurt me, which I feel kind of bad. I mean, I shouldn't feel bad about
You
it
shouldn't
because
feel
it
bad
was,
about it. No.
which is my trauma response. But looking back, like in my mind, like what I remember thinking was that it was much better because we were working together. Like, I don't even
Yeah.
remember really feeling like it hurt. I just remember being like, okay, like we're working together. She's telling me what's going on. It's fine. But I was still reacting
Yeah.
in a scared way because my body had held that trauma and then was like, what?
And I
So
wonder if, as we're talking about it right now, and we're kind of processing through it a little bit, I wonder if even just the word cervical lip, like,
yeah,
like brought stuff back,
yeah.
for you, just hearing those words and you're like, no.
Mhm.
So I really wonder about that, but I am so thankful that because you knew, like, we weren't trying to do anything to you, that we were asking your permission to help you,
Yes.
that was different. I will say on my end, that was really hard to see.
Yeah.
It was really, and to work with you, like, because we're trying to work with you the best we can, but to see this trauma response happening in you, I just hurt. It hurt my heart. And it was like, it was honestly challenging as a student, to see you going through that and to know that we're trying to help you, but at the same time weighing in my mind, are we causing more trauma? And that's a really hard line for, I would say, for providers, is that, we don't want to cause more trauma at all. So maybe in this instance, hospital and epidural is a great idea for you, just because you're having so much difficulty, and that would make things easy. So I remember these things going through my mind for you, just thinking like, are we hurting her more? Just even though we're not trying to hurt her, we're trying to help her. But mentally, are we causing where this is going to be a major trauma event for her also? And I remember we had talked before you went into labor, we had talked a little bit about your previous, but you had not, in my mind, I don't remember you acting like that was such a big deal before. I mean, like, you talked about it, like you told us about your experience, right? But it wasn't very focused on, you weren't like, I feel like it was really traumatic and all this. I mean, so you kind of glazed over it, I feel like. But that's what we do, right? When we've had trauma and we feel like, well, we need to downplay it and we need to, we're being I say this in myself, not you personally, but like, I'm being a whiner, or I should be tougher, or, I don't want to be complaining. And I still had a baby, like what that saying, healthy baby, then we're all fine.
Like it's worth it. So it doesn't matter.
Exactly.
And yeah, I mean, if I
those
have
things
to,
are true, but there's a much better way to be able to get there. And acknowledging that the experience getting there is important also, is really, I mean, it's very empowering,
well,
for
and
us.
that's the thing, is that I think I remember talking to you guys about it, and I just remember I probably got blotchy. That's what I do. My neck gets all like blotchy whenever I have to have an uncomfortable conversation. Because to me, which it's not, it should not be this big thing for me to tell you a provider hurt me, and that's something that I struggle with and we got to think about. But to me, it was like, I'm being a crybaby, that I'm, and I don't want them to be weird about me saying like this. It was hard for me to say the words, that lady hurt me.
Isn't that
Which,
interesting?
isn't that weird? I mean, because she did. I mean, in the end, and that, I'm not saying she is Satan or an awful person and is trying to hurt me. She just was doing what she thought was best, and it was not best, and it hurt me, and she should have talked to me. And I think, to reassure you, between the difference was, you were not causing me more trauma, because even though I was having a trauma response, everything, it was so helpful that everything was talked through. And I remember even like holding everything, not just like, oh, I'm going to do this to you. It was, we're going to work together. Okay. And everything that everything in Elsie's birth was, if you say stop, I will stop. If I'm checking you and it hurts, tell me to get out and I will get out.
Absolutely.
Like,
and
having that power is huge.
Hello, Healing Trauma Mamas listeners. I wanted to pause the podcast just for a moment to let you know about the platform that I've been using to create this podcast, Anchor by Spotify. Anchor has been so easy for me to use. As you all know, I've said many times that I'm a very unlikely podcast host. In fact, I never thought I'd be on a podcast, let alone hosting one myself. But when my daughter showed me Anchor last spring, I realized how easy it was for me to be able to create content and upload it to many different platforms using Anchor. I'm so thankful I got started, and I'm extremely thankful it's completely free. So I think that every single person has something valuable to share with the world. You listening right now have something valuable to share. And all you have to do is download the Anchor app and start your own podcast today. Let me know when you do, and I look forward to listening to it. Okay, back to the podcast. I really credit, and I'm going to continue saying the midwife because I didn't ask her permission to say her name on the podcast, and I should have done that beforehand. But I really I credit your midwife to teaching me that, so much, that she was always, and I know it's part of the midwifery model of care, is that we ask permission for everything. We always, informed consent is so big to us that we want to give you the pros and cons of something, and you make the decision, not us. We're not making decisions for you. Yeah. And that's something that she talked about often with mamas, that you're in control here. And at any point in time, you can tell me to stop. You can tell me to, if she's doing a vaginal exam, you can tell me to get out. You can tell me no. You can say, there's so many different things. She was very big on that. And I really thank her for teaching me that and showing me, trying to make sure that we do keep you in control, that this is your birth that you have allowed us to be a part of. And trying to, make sure that you stay empowered throughout your care and the birth and postpartum. So I'm so thankful that she taught me that, and that your birth, you had a provider like that who was going to keep telling you, working through it and talking to you and you're in control. You're the one making the decisions. And I remember her asking you several times, because I think it was really hard for her too. And she was like, you tell me to stop, and we'll stop, and we're done. And we're not going to continue doing this. And you were the one that kept saying, no, we can do it. We can do it. Just tell me what we're doing. You can do it, And I remember that several times happening, that I feel like, the midwife was kind of like, I'm not sure if we should continue, because it's so traumatic for you, because you were having such a traumatic response. It's extremely hard for you to see you crying and so distraught and telling us to not hurt you. And that hurt my heart so badly, just to keep telling you and reassure you and hold your hand. I remember brushing your hair out of your face and kind of pulling it back for you and just telling you, sweetie, we love you. We're not here to hurt you, and I even remember reminding you that you were having a baby a few times. I don't know if for some reason, I don't know why I remember it happened to reassure you that you're having a baby. and I don't know if it's because I saw the trauma response and where you kept kind of coming in and out of for where we were, and going back to that place. But I don't know if you remember that or not, but
there are a lot of little things like that I don't remember, but I know that it's so interesting listening to you talk about it, like something for any providers out there that are listening, it was huge for me, not only that you all kept asking and talking to me through it, but also that whenever I said, no, I can do this, you allowed me to continue to try, because even though I was having a trauma response, I knew that this is what I wanted to do. And don't get me wrong, I'll talk about in a second, there's a point where you guys were like, okay, I think we need to start talking about the hospital. And that was not something that I wanted, but we would have gone because I trust you all, but within the safety realm that you guys saw, like the realm of safety, that's what I meant.
Mm-hmm.
You continued to let me try. And that was huge because once again, even though I was freaking out, I was being empowered because I knew that's what I wanted. I was just because I do think it was just because my body had held on to that trauma in that spot. And whenever all that happened, it just triggered it. And things were taking a long time and I was exhausted. And so I just, even though it was so difficult for everyone else, people continued to let me try and work with me as long as it was safe.
And I would say, that's a big balance for midwives that I've seen, because we have this one side and the majority of the side that we're looking at is safety, right? So is baby safe? Is mama safe? So that's why we're checking vitals, we're checking heart tones and all of that, right? Making sure that you two are both staying safe. But the other aspect of it is that, like, are you like, is this too much? Are we pushing it to a level because you want a home birth so bad or an out of hospital birth so bad that we're going to cause issues, even if it's not related to the safety of you and the baby, but that it's still not a good idea. So sure. I feel like there's a balancing act that happens there, and it can be very challenging because, if we say, nope, I'm sorry, this is too much, this is out of our realm that we would like, to still keep you out of hospital, that you need to go in, that we risk you being so upset about that and us taking your out of hospital birth from you. And then on the opposite side, that we didn't call it sooner, and then we push it, and then you're upset at us for pushing it because you deemed it was too much. Like, I remember the thought in my head for you was that, and where it got to, which we're going to talk about in a second, got to like suffering. And that's not what it's about, especially, out of hospital people that are very gung ho about having an out of hospital birth and having all natural and everything. There's sometimes we can focus too much on what we deem the goal to be and not focus on the journey that's happening to try to get to that goal. And when it gets to suffering, I'm just like, this is not what this is supposed to be. This is not, it's not okay for you,
For sure. And, it got to that point at one point, in this birth where we pushed some more. And then it all of a sudden my cervix, which was a 9, like a 9.5, because I had a lip. It's like a 9.5. And it's all of a sudden just swelled up. My cervix swelled. She said it was a 4. So I went from a 9 to a 4. And I just remember her turning to my husband saying, we need to start talking about the hospital. And I freaked out because that was kind of my mode. And I was like, oh, what? And she was like, no, we're just talking, like, and she was reassuring me and talking to me. And literally as this is happening, without any of us knowing it really at the time, I went into transition. And I was like, I just want to get in the tub in the pool. And she was like, fine, you can get in the pool. We'll talk about it. And she was talking to the doctor. She was saying, listen, like, we just need you to have an epidural so your body can relax enough where it can still do this. Because if not, it's going to turn into an emergency. And which is so valid. Like, yes, that's what I needed, but I went into transition instead. And you guys are talking to me, and I'm in the tub. And I just remember going, and I kept saying, well, how am I going to get to the car? I'm going to die on my way to the car. Like, if you guys try to move me, like that's what's going to happen. Like, for some reason,
I remember you saying that. Yeah. You kept saying, like, how am I even going to get to the car? How am I even going to get there? Like, that was like,
how am I going to get pants on? I was like, this isn't going to happen.
Yeah.
And you guys were like, it's fine. Like, we'll carry you. It's fine. And in this moment, so all this is happening. My husband's in the other room, like, getting stuff. He's called someone to come get the kids, all of these things. Right. And we're doing all this, and I'm in the water. And I remember thinking it. Apparently I shouted it, says Madonna and my husband. I just went, okay. I remember saying or thinking, but I said it. I said, Jesus, you either need to make this stop. And I was like, because you've done it so much already, he's kept making the stop, since, well, and I didn't say this earlier, whenever that happened, whenever we were working on my cervix, the lip, the baby came down and was the same spot where I was almost crowning, and she went back up again. So this happened twice in this labor where the baby was like crowning and then just sucked back up twice, which is so bizarre.
Yeah, it's so wild.
It's wild. I mean, I'm reading books right now, lots of labor and delivery books, and they're all like all of them mention things going backwards or dilation going backwards, but they say it like just, that's very rare. And then they move on. I'm like, oh, it's happened to me. I know this thing. It's very rare, but it can happen.
Yes.
So, but anyway, so I was in the pool and I just said, Jesus, you either need to make this stop or give me my baby, because I can't do it anymore. Yep. And I went to stand up to get in the car, and I kind of flung my body over the side of the pool, and she shot out. Yeah. And I mean, there was zero pushing, full fetal ejection. Like she just,
I will never forget it. Yeah.
You guys like grabbed her basically. I mean,
do you remember me yelling?
You're like, yeah, get in here. That's what I remember.
Yes. Yes. And I think I yelled head to the midwife, and I yelled head. And I remember like I put my hands up real fast because you stood up out of the tub at this point in time. Right. And so my midwifery brain is thinking, oh my word, she better not sit down in that water, because this baby's just flowing, coming out real quick. So I remember because the midwife told me later, ooh, I got to hear your midwife voice. And I was like, oh, really? You did? And she's like, yeah, because I told you something like, do not sit down.
Yeah, I remember that.
Do you see? I don't remember it. But
I remember how like kind of, it was like almost like holding me out of the water. Yes,
I do feel like I was holding you up, like, do not sit down, do not do it. Yeah.
Because the baby I think she said I could still call it a water birth, because the baby went into the water and popped out, like because of where and the baby can't go back into the water. They'll drown. So
yes. Yeah, exactly. So that's why I was so adamant. Don't you dare sit down. Yeah. I remember like I was so stern with you. And then, then I held baby up on your chest. I remember. And then you sat down in the water with her up on your chest. And then like your face just went, oh, okay, we're fine.
Okay, we're done. Like it's honestly, I just laugh because the Lord, so much of that is healing.
I mean, it's honestly miraculous. I really have no clue how she came through your cervix just then.
I know it was
I really like, I can only attribute it to a miracle. I really, honestly, like no book is going to explain it.
It was crazy.
Yeah.
And like, even after that, I remember, and then we had, this is not relevant to the story. I bled a little extra. It was fine. We took some medicine. It was fine. I passed out a little bit. It was fine.
A little bit. Yeah, but it was fine.
I passed out. Madame caught me on my way and I made my funny joke about feeling so feminine.
Oh yeah, I forgot.
I was really proud of that. My sense of humor when I'm like passing out.
It was pretty funny.
But she came to check. And I just remember her being like, okay, I'm going to check for tearing and all that. And I could only imagine she expected me to have torn quite a bit because I bled extra and because she just shot out of a 4. Right. I was only dilated to a 4.
So on a midwife side, we're thinking you ripped your cervix and pushing that baby out and we're going to have to take you in. And it wasn't. Yeah. I was so shocked.
I had no stitches.
Again,
I had no tearing.
It had to be miraculous. Like
it was.
I seriously have no clue how that baby just came through there.
I know. It was amazing. I mean, I truly, and as much, all of my births, so something that's so interesting and something the Lord's used, I know we'll talk about this in a second, but I used to get kind of embarrassed, maybe a little bit embarrassed about how, I don't know, or I'll be jealous of people that are like, I realized that I wanted to do my births at home from the get-go, and I do it that way every time, and it's awesome. Or I know that I want my epidural, and I do it that way every time, and it's awesome. And for me, just that everyone is so different. It was almost like embarrassing. Like I had to take this huge journey to figure this out. But I've decided to start looking at it like a gift. So like this birth was insane. But miracles are gifts. I mean, they really are. And I can,
and it
even
was a
if it's,
gift for me as, you know, coming alongside, you know, helping your provider as a student midwife. That, I mean, what a gift that you provided, what an opportunity, because I'll never see anything like that again. I'm sure. And to be able to witness not only, you know, the redeeming qualities, because I feel like that birth was very redeeming. The redeeming qualities in it for you for dealing with that trauma and working through it during the birth, the redeeming qualities of having a provider who was listening to you and was trying her best to still keep you empowered and in the driver's seat and always making the decisions, you know, and then the aspect of learning. And I know I've personally shared this before, and I know I shared it on the podcast that I was on Happy Home Birth, but just, you know, I didn't realize some trauma that I had been dealing with and how it brought that stuff up. And I was looking at you working through it. And then it was causing my brain to go like, whoa, 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 you know, you've got this stuff that you're working through also. So it just, I mean, I feel like there was so many facets of how that birth taught so many of us so many different things.
Yeah. It was really beautiful. I mean, it was long and crazy.
It was.
And it was really beautiful.
Yes.
And
it really was. I mean, it was amazing. And it, I mean, for your whole family, you have such a sweet family, and all the children, when we had them come from the park, I think they had went to with your friend, and they came to get to see her and everything afterwards. Little Miss Elsie, like it was just so beautiful and so wonderful. And yeah, we were all exhausted and tired,
I know,
but that's
so
okay. that's
so long.
That's what happens. But well, I'd love to hear about, you know, kind of what's happened for you since then. I know a lot's happened, like when I was looking at going on the Happy Home Birth podcast, and I touched base with you and said, would you mind if I tell a little bit of your story, because, you know, it kind of relates to the things I've seen and trauma response and all of that, you know, and then relating to my personal trauma. And of course, you were so gracious to give me the permission to do that. And then I feel like there's that kind of was a catalyst a little bit for you and on a lot of different things happening with you for the birth world. So do you want to share those things?
Of course. So yeah, when you and I talked, and I had been listening to birth stories and just, I don't know, just wanting to do something. So one part of this is where we moved to is very underserved. So I mean, I'm trying to think of the kind way to say this. I'm not sure there is one.
Sometimes there's not.
Because there's not. I mean, so people don't like to have babies at our hospitals because people die at our hospitals. So they will drive 2 hours to the hospital in either direction. And then there's one midwife, maybe two, but I think she's about to move. She's like brand new and studied under this midwife, but she's about to leave, that will service the town I live in right now. And then there are 0 doulas.
Wow.
Yeah. And things like you'd have to drive 2 hours to see a chiropractor that is certified, Webster certified. I mean, there's just not the birth community. There's nothing. And most people, you know, I think everyone does the best what they have, but it's just very underserved. And I know most of my friends here that have given birth, everything's, and I think this is very common in the birthing world in general, is to be afraid, and everything is a fear response. Our culture has kind of made us that way. And I, through all of that, just really felt called to be a doula. So I started training. I have 3 births coming up this summer.
Yay!
I am really excited. And you know, I'm almost done my labor doula stuff. Everything will be done next week actually. And so besides the going to the births, but I'm really excited about it. I feel like especially in an area that's underserved,
Mm-hmm.
you don't have someone helping you and teaching you and just being there with you.
Mm-hmm.
Like I did when I had a doula, and then also like I did I didn't have a doula with you, but because that would have been too many people in a camper.
That would have been a lot.
That would have been a lot. But you all took care of me in the very same way. And so I just could see that like so many people make so many of their decisions out of fear and out of past trauma and things like that. And so because of that, I want to be able to help people. I can't think of the next word.
No, that's
So
wonderful.
I'm really excited. It's and like I said before about being kind of ashamed of all the variety of stories. I've realized it's a gift because
Absolutely.
I have a different level of empathy for whatever you choose. Whatever, if for you being at a hospital and doing it all medicated is what you want and what makes you feel safe, okay, like,
Yep.
but you can still have someone help, or if it's at home or if it's in a camper away from home or at an Airbnb or whatever,
Mm-hmm.
or at a birth center, like I can be helpful. So I'm excited to help maybe start changing some of the birth culture where I live, and through that help reduce trauma, and different things like that. So I'm really excited.
Yeah, that's wonderful that you can use all those different experiences that you've had and be able to relate to each one of your clients. I mean,
Yes.
that is a wonderful gift. I mean, because somebody who's only chose out of hospital births and had all their babies out of there, then it's a little more difficult for them to, even as much training as you can do until you've been in those shoes and you've been in that seat, you can't quite fully understand, where that woman is at. And part of, being a doula is just, providing, that support that women need. And so that's wonderful. Had you ever thought about becoming a doula prior to Elsie's birth?
Not probably before her birth. And I guess she's a year, 13 months old now.
Already.
I know. But I think it had maybe crossed my mind. I'm really quick. I stay at home and I got a lot of kids. And so I'm really quick to be like, that is not a possibility, and just like moving on. And so I think it had made and I will say this, whenever I had Gladys, because I had a doula, I was like, that would be cool to be a doula. And she was like, okay, like, because a lot of ladies feel that way when they're having babies, and she was just like, yeah, I think whenever, she goes, she was just kind of like, yeah, whenever you're not having babies anymore, like if that kind of sticks. She wasn't telling me like I couldn't do it. She was just kind of like, yeah, a lot of people feel that way when they're having babies, like like just conversational. And so I didn't really think much of it. And then after Elsie, I think it had kind of crept in a little bit at a time. And then recently, when I've connected with some mamas that just didn't have people and didn't have, like their families had not, like everything, they just do things the way that the last person did it. And like that, it's just kind of cyclical like that. Once I started to see that and I really began to feel like there's something missing here, and that is a spot that I could fill. So I'm really excited about it.
Well, that's great. Because you're in the desert in way many more ways than one, right?
Yeah, it's true.
Yeah. Well, and you guys have decided to stay in that area?
We have. I mean, unless the Lord does something crazy, which, he does all the time. So
yeah, that's so
right
true.
Now, it is true. But right now we're just planning to just stay and until we're not supposed to anymore. But,
great.
We're excited.
Have you done, since this is a trauma podcast, I would love to discuss with you just a little bit longer. Now, 14 months after that experience, where you revisited that trauma during that birth. Have you in any other way tried to work through that, or sought out a counselor, or are doing anything to help with that? Or you just feel like working in birth work now is very, medicating for you?
Yeah, for sure. So I don't have a counselor that I see on a regular basis. I have a friend who's a counselor, that I be like, hey, go into counselor mode, please. And I'll talk through
Switch
stuff.
hats for a moment, please.
Yeah, I'm like,
I have one of
please.
those also.
It's a nice thing.
Yes.
But really for me, a big part of it, and granted, I process things by talking about them. And if I don't talk about something, that's a big deal. And like we had kind of talked about earlier, I hadn't really talked about much about how deep that hit, the stuff with Buck, until because I still felt uncomfortable even saying that out loud, that this lady hurt me to you all. Like, that was what, 6 years later, 7 years later, it was still hard for me just to say that somebody hurt me. I don't know. It just was hard. And so
and then you didn't even realize exactly what all you had said until last year, not even quite a year ago, whenever I talked on the podcast. I know that because you messaged me, wait, did I say that exactly?
Yeah. That's exactly. You were like, she kept saying, don't hurt me. And I was like, what? And you were like, yeah, maybe talk to John. And John was like, yes, you said that. Also, you said this and this and this. Yeah. I was like, oh, well, yeah. And so I think, processing a lot of that. And that's something else like a doula can be helpful with is helping you process your birth story. That would have been, something that is good. But something I've kind of tried to make a practice of, for me, whoever your person is, for me, it's my husband. And I will be like, listen, I got to talk this out loud. And I know you've heard me say it 8,000 times. And I've talked to you about what happened here. And I know that even things like, because in all of my births, like he was there. So I'm able to say, okay, I need you to talk me through what you remember about this and just help me think and get through it. And I do that a lot. I mean, I still do, even with any of the births, really, because I've also, something else that has happened for me with my births is I've recently picked up details about past births that were not okay, even though I was satisfied and everything was good and I didn't feel traumatized at the time. Like, I'm having to still like go back and stuff about Betty's birth or about Stan's, where I'm kind of grieving some of that and loss of control that I had, and healing from that, even though I didn't even realize it was a thing. Does that make sense? And really talking through those things and other traumatic events in my life, can be at something else, that just, there's just all kinds of random stuff that happens, and talking through those things with my husband and having him talk about it to me. And I mean, we do that regularly. I mean, it's not like on the calendar, but
yeah, that's a great marriage too, being able to talk about all those things. I have to talk to him
about it. And I have to say, John, I know that you're probably sick of talking about this, but I need you to, so that I can get through it. So, next time, maybe I'll be able to handle it a little differently. Maybe I won't, and that'll be okay. But so we can both be expecting, whatever. So it's, but that's kind of where I'm at now.
That's great.
Yeah, it's good. And if there was there aren't a lot of grown up, once again, underserved area. There aren't very many. I'd have to drive like 2 hours, and gas is like $5.20 a gallon. So
that's true.
Throwing that out there. So I'd have to drive a couple hours to get to like a real quality licensed therapist. So, but and I will, and I would, if it got to that point. But
well, I'm so thankful you have such a good husband to be able to discuss those things with you and bounce them off and be able to talk. And then being able to serve your community as a doula, I mean, I'm sure that's going to be so rewarding for you, and be able to relate to different people and their situations. So I really
hope so. I think, at first, whenever I told people that I was going to be a doula, and having had my last birth at home. They all were like, "You're a crazy hippie lady, and we don't want to talk to you about our birth stuff."
Oh,
But whenever I was able to say, "Oh no, I've done that," like there were great things about having an epidural in the hospital, and there were great things about my induction, and like all of my births have good things. Like they're all well, every experience has pros and cons. And so that has been, once I've been able to tell people, and like kind of they're like accepting of that, they're like, oh, okay. So I think it is such a blessing from the Lord that he's entrusted me with those experiences to be able to help other people.
Yeah, that's wonderful.
Yeah,
And what a great way to use your trauma experience to be able
yes.
to benefit others. I mean,
Yeah,
that's just such a blessing for sure.
it really is. It really is. I have learned to look at it that way. And I know for everybody, like trauma it's hard. Well, obviously it's hard, it's trauma, but it doesn't come quickly to get to that place. And that's okay. It takes time. And one day, you may be able the Lord may present you with an opportunity where you go, oh, look, I can, even though this was horrific, and I really wish this never happened, there is something good that can come from it, and being willing to do that. And but that might
Absolutely.
take a really long time, and that's really
Yeah.
okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's wonderful. Well, being open to that is
Yeah.
great. Yeah. Well, I'm so happy that you were able to come on the podcast, and thank you so
Of
much for
course.
sharing your experiences and your story with us. And I really hope that, everyone listening that might be able to glean some good from your positivity, right?
Of course. I hope so too. It was great.
Yeah,
Thanks for having me.
absolutely. Thanks, Aly. Thank you for listening. May you be encouraged and strengthened by what you've heard today. Remember, you are dearly loved by your Creator, so be who He created you to be. May you go in peace, friends. Till next time, Shalom.